Okay, 5, 4, 3,
Ready?
2.
5, 4, 3.
Wait, what's this called? Big announcement coming soon? Oh, yeah. 5.
Welcome to the Big Announcement Coming Soon podcast. I'm one of your exciting hosts, Michael Bull, back after a week off because I decided I wanted more sleep. And I'm joined today by the full crowd. Nick, back from the grave, David, and Jeff. Great to see you guys all again.
GM, everybody.
Hey guys.
Yo.
All right, we got a lot of exciting things to talk about, almost as exciting as they were 5 minutes ago. We're going to talk about the Bitcoin price halving, and we'll ignore the whole idea of, causation, correlation, and all that as we talk about it. Ether hit over 2,100, and Miles Douche on Twitter is really jangling the chain of Jeff Renson, and Nick will follow up in the end with his happy NFT talk. So let's run off to David here, who was talking about Bitcoin going in half, and the boomer joke coming from me is, you mean it's going to be half price now?
Yes, exactly. So you should dump your Bitcoin into my hands.
There we go.
Yeah. So today's Bitcoin analysis comes from the supply side of economics. Supply side usually,
or lack of, but yeah.
Yeah, exactly. Supply side economics is usually like not really something you should rely on. Like, so that was like what stock to flow is all about. Like how much is in the stock and how much is flowing, and then how much should it be worth.
That's the Plan B old approach that's been violated now.
Yeah, exactly. And so, but irrespective, there is some truth to it. So it's important to look at. And so Coiner Yadox has been kind of spot on for a while on a lot of his posts, and he's been kind of tweeting the journey, I guess you can say, on a thread from the last several months. So one of the posts was like, okay, so this is what the Bitcoin halving has looked like the last 3 times. And so what the Bitcoin halving is that when miners mine Bitcoin or, complete the, block, they then get Bitcoin, and currently they get
6.25, I think.
Yeah, there you go. Bitcoin per block.
No, I think it was 6.24, if I remember. But go on, sorry.
Sweet. No, and then so every 4 years that will then have, making it the network, less and less. I guess you could say like you get less and less from it. And so in theory, because the supply of Bitcoin is diminishing, there's getting less and less released every day. That means in theory the price would go up, because something that people don't really think about is that miners are mining Bitcoin and selling it onto the market every day. It's not just like everyone's sitting there, nothing's happening, and then someone decides to buy Bitcoin and it goes up. Every day, Jeff was saying earlier, 900 Bitcoin need to be bought from miners.
So 900 are mined, and like you're saying, so to offset electricity, that 900 goes out for costs. And then if you're an investor, because now there's like large American public miners that haven't gone out of business yet, they need cash back for their holdings, for their bank accounts and everything. So the miner's business sometimes is to hold Bitcoin and create it, but a lot of times it's to dump it on the market.
Yeah, well,
exactly.
Yeah.
And so they need that Bitcoin then for, on the other side of the ledger, has to be people who believe in it enough to want to buy it and hold it as much as it costs to mine it. And so that's
so now they're going to mine half as much, is what you're saying.
Yeah, well, they'll mine with the same amount of energy, but they will get half as much. And so
What a
the
brilliant
supply
system.
will decrease.
Okay.
Yeah, exactly.
More greenhouse gases for half as much. Okay, great.
Yeah, for sure. Exactly. I mean,
whatever we have to do to build trust into a stupid system, but okay, go on.
Well, precisely. I mean, and there's always the counter argument to that when you look at like I think the same amount of energy is put into like printing dollar bills or something like that in America, or like something along these lines, where it's like,
that argument. So you think this is bad? Well, they're bad too, so we can be bad also instead of being better. I get it. Okay, go on.
Yeah, exactly. Because
it's like somebody spray paints my neighbor's house. Well, I should be able to spray paint
No, but I think
too.
If you write an article about Bitcoin energy consumption, you should write an article and say, if we don't have Bitcoin, we have dollars, and let's talk about the dollar energy consumption. And like this pile of metal that I have sitting around that I got to do something with.
I'm a big believer in the whataboutism argument. So go ahead.
But to kind of come back at that, like, so if you trust the World Economic Forum, which I'm sure you do, everybody does. They just hosted Crusoe, which does flaring capture for Bitcoin mining, for example. And so that's actually solving environmental concerns with Bitcoin mining. And so early in the kind of days of Bitcoin mining or whatever, there are definitely like concerns for sure about how this will work. And actually, we'll get into this with Jeff's or your Ether article, actually, where we talk about Ether versus Bitcoin. But essentially speaking, coming back to the topic at hand, like if the mining supply is decreasing over time, therefore that's how much you're getting is decreasing. The price should go up, right? Because there's less supply. Now, the problem with that argument is that that is a known fact, and the counter argument to it is that if the market already knows that this is how much supply will exist at any point in the time in the future, then it can price that into its actions, and so therefore it should be price agnostic. So this whole idea of supply, so destructive flow, etc., is not, doesn't fit because it doesn't take into account essentially people's emotions and the way they act. And that, I think, is kind of where this fits, because essentially what you're looking at is a very emotional market. Young, everybody's like idealistic, like we want to change the world with Bitcoin, and then on the other side people are like, no, it's bad for the environment. And so there's like, like attacking forces, but it's never boring, right? And so you have kind of like this coming in, and so the question is, how much does the market really know about Bitcoin and the halving that we think it does? Like, it definitely, like, big stock investor knows everything about the company in theory, well, in theory, but the average Bitcoin investor probably doesn't know about halving until probably 6 months before it starts, and before it starts to come into the media's focus, and then starts to think, oh, wait a minute, this will actually have a price effect on Bitcoin, and they start to buy in. And so it's like the one big event of Bitcoin per year. So if you think of Bitcoin as kind of like a big, like a casino, if you will, this is the one event, because every year that's the only thing that happens with Bitcoin, right? You just print the same amount of money each year, and then it halves, and then you keep going.
Every four.
Every four, yeah, exactly.
And
so
it's the Bitcoin cycle fits the Bob Lucas cycle, which, like, we've talked about 4-year cycles and other human behavior. And then Nick, before we started, you were making a point about business cycles and 4-year cycles and lineups and stuff.
Yeah, I mean, whether or not it's like on a macro scale long term, as we see more institutions get involved, or if it's a quarter by quarter front run. And I just was curious about whether or not you will see the FOMO come from the institutions, where we know it takes a little bit longer, and maybe that curbs a bit of that emotional erratic behavior to get, because it's more red tape to get in, or if it becomes just us who are always lingering around in the casino, degenning or playing other games until we can get back on track with the next cycle. I'm curious. I mean, it's probably always retail, right? I mean, that's the narrative. That's kind of the meta. But you never know now that we're seeing more and more institutions in this space. It really affected last cycles, but like not the whole halving cycle, but the bull market in general. So we'll see. We'll see what happens.
Yeah, it seemed like that when the institutions were talking about it, that was what created the excitement. So I don't know if we're going to see that again this time. Haven't heard any rumblings so far.
Oh, I don't know. Like eToro just combined with Twitter to offer crypto through Twitter. I mean, there's definitely institutions still coming on board with crypto. Okay. And like the SEC cases are going through. So, I mean, Coinbase, actually, that's a news article to throw up, is that they sued the SEC because SEC is supposed to provide regular answers within a reasonable quantity of time, is what it says in their charter. And it's been like over a year or whatever, and now they're getting sued, and they're like, so what the hell? Tell us what this is. And so that'll be interesting to see what happens, because effects of those cases could impact both price, but mainly sentiment. Like a lot of people out there, we don't really think, like, we're all degens, we're like, we're going to be in this irrespective, but a lot of people out there really do want the government to say, yes, this is fine for you to do. And if they say it's not okay, a lot of people don't want to do it. Like so it does help.
Yeah.
All right, so why don't we go from the irritation of the people in Washington off to Shanghai to talk about Ether rises about 2,000 after the Shanghai upgrade, bringing year-to-date gain to more than 75%. So I know at least one person in this room is always excited about Ether. And I think Ether seems nice. It actually seems to make some sense. It doesn't ruin the world as much as Bitcoin does, and you can like build cool stuff off of it. So why don't we just drop Bitcoin and go to Ether?
Yeah.
Well, and let's talk really quickly. Shanghai
or
is
ETH for those cool people.
People started locking up ETH for the transition to proof of stake ETH away from proof of work. So you lock up your coins instead of mining, and that lets you produce more blocks without getting into any details. About 2 years ago, you could lock up your coins, and now you're able to withdraw them from the network as they've made the upgrade. And people didn't. In fact, what happened is people, and I'm on the board of this, I haven't staked any yet, but I wanted to wait till it was done because I'd seen upgrades be delayed for years and years and years. So now that it's here, instead of withdrawing, people are saying it works. Let's stake our ETH and lock up more ETH and sell less ETH. And then it gets into what David's been talking about and that long-term value proposal of ETH, not just as tech, but also the overwhelming POS versus proof of work, how people feel about that, and then the return, like the constant returns from staking and using that as a kind of a financial foundation, along with if your company is using Ether, if you're using the network, you should hold some. If you're holding some, you should hold enough to get returns on it. And David, I'm stepping on your argument here. So how is ETH going to the moon?
Yeah, and I mean, I've always, like, to be honest, right since I began crypto, I've always been an ETH, not maxi, but I believe in the flippening for sure, all that stuff. You should actually post the flippening link in the
flippening where ETH rises above Bitcoin
in price, yeah. But it's interesting, like if you look at, I'll get to the flippening stats in a second, but yeah, the argument really is that, right? It's kind of like, so let's say like you're a sovereign wealth fund, and you're really hip to the times, and you want to start getting into a little bit of this Web3 stuff, even though it's scary. You're confronted with two choices. You've got Bitcoin, which is kind of like digital gold. It has this halvening thing that happens, but that's about it. And basically, a certain amount will be mined every day, and it hurts the environment to do so currently, for sure. And it's based on belief, like how much that coin is worth is based on belief. And so that's kind of what enticed El Salvador, maybe. But what about Norway's sovereign wealth fund? Let's say they say, okay, well, then we've also got this other thing called Ether, right? And so what Ether does is it's like digital oil. And you can invest in this oil because you actually have to use the oil to power all these apps, as Mike was saying, dApps built on top of this thing. They're providing all these crazy, interesting new innovations. I can own this bottom layer one and the gas that runs it. That's pretty cool. And then not only that, but it's proof of stake now, so it doesn't hurt the environment. And what's even better is that two things are happening. One, if I buy 32 ETH and I stake it, I will get 7% back, 4 to 7% of ETH back. As a business, if you're deploying things on ETH, that's almost like a business expense you have to take, because you don't want to accidentally be like, oh, we need more ETH to power our dApp. Oh, it's now $1,000 million. I wish I had invested in the oil rig at the time to kind of just make sure my business was always kind of future proofed, just for the sake of
And you're
whatever.
not saying Web3 businesses, you mean like normal brick and mortar businesses that are doing things online, sending transactions, accepting payments. Everybody's going to have an ETH access point, not just NFT projects and Web3 Gen businesses.
Wouldn't that be nice?
Yeah, well, exactly, and because it also provides you the ability to like interact directly with the node. It's more secure. So yeah, these are reasonable things to consider as like, okay, so this is a really interesting investment. It's like the internet of the future. It has all these things, and its currency actually is going to be used. And not only that, they've made it deflationary. So currently, every hour, I think it's like however many ETH is burned, and so like purely from a degen perspective, like this has never really happened before on a meaningfully used chain. And right now it's the bear market. No one's really thinking about it too much. But what happens when ETH really starts to get used a lot and they're burning more and more of it, and actually people need it more and more, and people are buying it, and it's and the economics of it could get really out of hand, which is exciting for people to make money. But it also kind of represents interesting things for the Ether network. The final point I'll make is this, and it comes back to the Bitcoin argument at the beginning. What happens if Ethereum gets more users, more people buy this stake idea and start staking more, and the flippening does happen? And then Ethereum as a network is worth more money than Bitcoin. Well, Bitcoin's only real use case is we are the most secure network. We are digital gold. But now Ethereum is actually securing more wealth than Bitcoin is. So why would you hold digital gold when you could hold? So like when it gives you nothing and it's inflating versus this thing that's deflating and gives you interest on it. So I think there's going to be a real. That's where I think that the fate of Bitcoin is really up in the air, because it relies almost on this religious spirit about it, whereas Ethereum is like, you can make lots of money on this, and this is the economics of it. Get on board, because you're going to need.
So when's that going to happen?
Oil.
When do I sell all my Bitcoin to buy Ethereum?
Well, I already flipped 50-50 at the 0.062 level, so I was pretty happy with that. But
I thought it was
yeah, I mean,
0.063. I always plate those two.
yeah, well, I go between 6.2 and 6.5, so average, I guess,
Got it.
0.63.
Yeah, somewhat. Yeah, it's okay.
Yeah,
So
yeah.
here's
But
here's where I
yeah.
bought your argument. I think Bitcoin is money and ETH is oil, as the way it works, and ETH has issues with is it money and the scheduling and people can change. It doesn't need to be, because I would rather have digital oil than digital gold, because I've never believed in gold in the real life. In real, when society breaks down, I don't care about gold. I want cans of vegetables and stuff to trade. So digital
Oily
oil
vegetables.
is a
Yes.
better investment than digital gold.
Vegetable oil.
And then if we
There we
trade
go.
in ETH, and we don't need to call it money, trade in digital oil, it just circumvents the fiat layer, which really the reason, right, going back to fiat is to have, tradable stuff you can have you don't have to have matching goods and things like that. We can trade in oil because now it's easily transferable. You can denominate it any way you want. That logical argument, that analogy makes me want to sell a whole bunch of Bitcoin for ETH.
And my point on top of that is that if you substituted the word NFT for oil, then you're doing that already, right? And it's onboarding and loads of other people, not to mention the fact that like there's probably going to be a lot of NFTs locked up in it, or even maybe not the fair value of NFTs, but they will just kind of
You're selling cars that need the oil to run. People like cars.
continue to drive people and also ETH into that system, right? Like that whole different style with multitudes of utility on top of ETH, which is already proving to be full of more utility than Bitcoin long term, right? So yeah, I'm super bullish on ETH.
All right, why don't
Yeah,
we
I mean-
move on from this to altcoins? So going from our main two coins to altcoins, and this guy Miles Deutscher says there'll never be another altcoin run like 2021 again because things are different. Jeff's all excited about that. Are you mad at Miles? Are you upset that he's younger than you and smarter? I mean, what's the deal? Or more popular? Maybe you're smarter, but
I
he's more popular.
think so. I
Wait,
started.
just to clarify, yeah. Well, no, you were going to say it. Say it.
I started
he's got a check
in
mark.
2018, and David was around for what I consider like when the real alt seasons happened, and that's a Bitcoin to alt trade. There have been good alt movements since. There have been the narrative of ETH killers. So I think he really saves himself and clarifies in the thread as people argue back. Oh, different this time. And yeah, that's my thoughts today. Is there another alt season, and what is one? Back in the day when you traded Bitcoin to alts, there would be an alt season where a lot of Bitcoin money would push into alts. There was no USDC or USD or Tether to go into. So the trading pushed up alts quickly, then flooded back into Bitcoin, which was something that I was told about. I wasn't here for that time. For me, I saw alt seasons. Yeah.
It's like a spring, right? So if you only have one way in and out, really, I mean, there was USDT, but nobody really trusted it. So like Bitcoin or alts, and so the meme used to be Bitcoin up, alts down, Bitcoin down, alts down, Bitcoin sideways, alts moon. And so you're kind of like waiting for that spring to compress, and then like all these like little illiquid projects surrounding Bitcoin, the money will flow back out and it'll just go wee, and then that money flows back into Bitcoin as like the people are milked from the initial wee guy. And
Yeah.
That would be the game.
Yeah.
And so
But it happened a
that's
lot more frequently.
Yeah, and that's what it was.
True.
We had some good runs in 2018 to 2020. Some Polygon Matic coins like that came along. And then in
Solana.
2020,
Yeah, huge ones.
2021, we had Luna, Sol, and AVAX. Sol went $3 to 200. Luna went 50 cents to 100 and whatever. So there was these contained kind of, we're going to take over from ETH, which they haven't. And then David pointed out another, NFTs really had an alt season. BAYC, Fidenzas, we have great pumps for 3 days and 2 months of Gremlin toads being worth millions, and now they're back. But are those the alt seasons? Because when he says, sorry, Nick, my last point, when he says alt season, I think every single low cap coin is going to 10x over the next 2 weeks. Alt season might mean go find the hot micro point of the market, like Pepe coin last week. Because it's going to be these small places. Because what we don't have for being different is, he talks about the COVID cash. We don't have Luna and UST and Sol pumping so much cash in. where everybody who was already in crypto seemed to get rich and then filter out to even to other projects. Like it wasn't a fiat in, it was UST and Sol pumping us. So I think we get little different ones, but I don't think we see the crazy pumps that we saw before. And I know most people disagree with me.
I mean, listen, I think it's narrative season. I think it should always have been reframed to narrative season because yeah, the alt season itself, the very first one, or the ones that people talked about in the past, that's the narrative, and there was a meta and a reason behind all of it. It worked. But I mean, we often forget, right? Like Link had its own narrative in its own run in a bear market, and all of a sudden it was uncorrelated to anything Bitcoin was doing or uncorrelated to other things. You have these things that slip through the cracks, and it's happens when there's downtime or boring times. But you have all sorts of narratives. We had the layer one narratives. Before that, you had the ETH killer narratives with Neo. You always have the XRP narrative. To me, I think yeah, NFTs is just a narrative. Ordinals narrative. What you're seeing with meme coins now, narrative, and because more people are switched on to it, just like happening in David's article. I mean, you're going to end up seeing more savvy traders and more sporadic, smaller pockets of these seasons. But they're all driven by narrative. So
I
I mean,
like
it's
that. I
really
think that
competitive.
that perspective on it makes it easier to define what they all are. They're not alt seasons. That was a one narrative one time. This is different season. Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
but I also think that like narratives, like there didn't used to be enough narratives out there to invest. Like now there's so many different narratives you can be in. But like back
Correct.
in the day, it's like, oh, I could be in Bitcoin, or I could be in Ethereum, or I could be in like another L1. And other than that, there was one or two other like Golem or something like did like three like online computer rendering or whatever. But like there wasn't really many. It was more just kind of like, yeah, I just dump money at like something random and then whoo, it goes up or down. But and then like as you go into the next season, it was like, oh, now investors and big VCs will tell us what to buy because they know best. And we're like, okay, which VCs are backing this company? Okay, let's try and get in before they dump on us or whatever. Or oh, bullish unlocks and that whole thing. And that was that. I mean, I would argue that that was problematic for the market because it was just a manufactured situation of the chaotic one before. And so each time it gets more orderly. But yeah, next time for sure there will be another one because I think human nature doesn't change. It's not like the casinos change; they just expand. Casinos are like they didn't go from like, oh, this was a good idea to like, well, let's just keep it this size. They just whoosh.
Mm.
Another one though, hold on, because now the conversation's changed. Another alt
Uh-oh.
season, or like Nick said, a narrative season where something's
Yeah.
gonna come in.
Well, yeah, I mean, I think the reason it all pumped together in the last one is because there's such low liquidity that whoever was doing it just like pumped everything and then just took money off everything. Now they can't really do that because there are big enough chains out there that you can't have like alt season on high. So you'd have like DeFi season and then NFT season because the money kind of all started to move towards a certain narrative, you're saying.
Mhm.
But I think what's interesting will be like the future is more bright than dark because, well, not for all coins, obviously, but eventually you don't want alt seasons. You just want like Ethereum to perform by itself, irrespective of Bitcoin. And it started to do that. Like if you looked at what Ethereum did last time, Bitcoin went down 80%,
Mm.
Ethereum went like down like 95%. This time, same amount. So it's reached blue chip status that enough people are in it and holding it. And so you could assume that next time there will be potentially Solana, AVAX, a couple of these others that also start to become blue chips. And then you don't just have alt seasons, you'll have like AVAX season and
I think
it'll
you're
be
you're always going to have alt season, just based on the frame of mind of the people that trade. They're always looking for an alternative.
exactly, yeah. And so
It
it's
goes
more
back
about
to the old guy Jeff and I met that said, "Oh, I'm going to get into Bitcoin because it's the new economy. It's the new way to make money." And I'm like, "You're such a new fool."
yeah. Well, it's just like it's a hot ball of money now rolling around. Versus in the past, it was more
Yeah,
just like
the
get
psychology
deep
of it is,
and time
yeah,
it.
it's trying to make a quick buck. And
Yeah, I
so
mean, but it's the same with the
alts
stock
will
market,
fulfill
really.
that.
Mhm.
Yeah,
Yeah,
the
yeah.
stock
It's
market is
like
now the
trading
same.
penny stocks or individual stocks. Sure, absolutely.
These days, any
But
stocks,
this,
right?
yeah, but this one, but it's
Try First Republic Bank is down from 200 to $8 today. Oh my
Yeah.
God.
there's a good
And
buy.
That's after
they got
$100 billion from JPM and the other banks and the government. And I just heard the government's not willing to bail them out anymore. So it
Oops.
took more. AIG, which was too big to fail last time, what took 150 billion. It was the biggest bailout, right? And
mhm.
now just this random bank is going to go bust, even though it was bailed for 100 billion. Things are
Yeah,
out of control.
Silvergate needed 1.8 to plug the hole from the losses from that bond sell-off, which hold to
Totally.
hold to maturity would have been fine. Had to do it early. Nobody would give them 1.8 because it was an execution. And First Republic, they tried to save and realized it actually couldn't be.
Yeah.
Hmm.
Now the turntables.
All right, let's go
The
from exciting things to
turntables have
boring
turned.
things. Nick wants to talk about why NFTs are boring.
Yeah, so here's the design challenge, right?
Yeah,
We convinced Mike.
You're pretty
Like-
excited about NFTs, so it's hard to believe they're going to be boring.
Well,
Go on.
But how then do we get this to the common normie, right? Like the question remains, if this is a narrative and maybe one that hopefully has some staying power, maybe not in this iteration, in this current shape or form, however good, bad, or ugly it is, but digital assets and the concept of decentralization in itself, what role does that play to get more people? I mean, we're all former educators, right? What role does that play in education to get more people involved? What role does that play to create mass adoption, to create it to become a lasting narrative? People aren't going to be willing to just buy art online for a currency that they're not familiar with, right? So what's the purpose? Is it blasphemy, or is it something that we really need to like maybe prepare the next generation for, or at the very least make it somewhat intertwined or integrated into curriculums?
Isn't it just a speculation? The whole point of the NFT is just to make money.
No. I think the use case, because a very
No.
smart man once talked to me about badging in education for years. He pushed badging
Yeah.
on me,
That's true.
micro-credentials, ways to show that you don't need to go to an overpriced institution to learn certain things. For me, it was hard as a computer science teacher to take computer science classes, not education classes, for continuing education, and finding what if I could do badging. And then this brings back to NFTs and this soulbound token thing of transfer, but NFTs to prove what you've been doing as an educator. And right, you have special ed licenses, reading endorsement licenses, different grade levels you can teach. There's so many endorsements we get. And we've talked about transcripts in the past, the pain of that, but here's who I am. Here's the providence, the proof of what I've done as an educator. And I think NFTs help facilitate, streamline, and prove all of that.
I mean, you're right.
That's true. So NFTs is a badge, but if you can ever get badging to take off.
But you can do that.
I think in general, NFTs is as like a tamper-proof credential that's on the blockchain, right? That's also transferable, right? I mean, we can probably put it up there
an actual use case.
But like the 6529 had created an NFT on a PowerPoint. Actually, it was like touting it as the very first PowerPoint NFT, right? But it's just a simple timeline, right? Talking about where we are in 2020 or where we started ish, depending on what you want to argue the origin story. But for ETH NFTs, let's talk a little bit about like collectibles and art, maybe gaming and metaverse. That's where we are now. Maybe brands, clothing, IP, culture. That's kind of like the intangible assets of it, right? For the natively digital. But then you go into this more abstract physical world, right? With the merger of like Web 2, Web 3, which is going to affect all of us, right? Just like our cross-border payments. We don't know that we're using Ripple. I'm using Ripple to send money from Thailand to the US. I didn't know that. I don't buy any XRP or even make that connection. But I'm a user, right? When you get into the abstract physical, it's like services, off-chain aspects, and then governance. And you're talking deeds of houses, court documents, notarized stuff. I don't know.
These are theory, but like there are a couple of real examples. So like I was talking to our CMO yesterday, and she was talking about a similar example that I think I think it's Chanel, but I could be wrong, is doing like, so if you buy like a really expensive handbag, it should come with provenance, that is the handbag. How do you know it got there? It's got a logistics chain attached to it. You can actually see the person you got it from. You can even tip that person or pay for the carbon credits through that NFT, for example. And so like, it's not so much, ooh, would this be cool? It's more like a competitive advantage that something high end can now do to prove that they're not, been ripped off from whatever, like, which is always a big problem for luxury goods. I mean, that's one example. I mean, recently, like I've always been, my only NFT buys are always with utility. It's got to be something that they do. And so I joined the Hashverse, a team of 15 people to compete in the Hashverse in a competition. And it's actually it's pretty cool. So the hash flow is actually a DEX, a trade for perps DEX, I believe. And they, in order to build a DAO around it, they have created a Halo type game that you can play with people, and then if you win the game, you can like I guess like it's like attack the other team in certain ways on their trading, and you're competing. It's kind of an interesting take. And yeah, it kind of like in terms of NFTs, anyways, where it's worked because I've gone out and bought like my sword of Hephaestus and my like like boots and chest armor and stuff like that, and I'm ready to go to battle. But it's interesting because it's just like a way of essentially, breaking apart games and all the things we used to do. Is like, oh, Blizzard, it owns all my, World of Warcraft stuff. And if I delete my account or I don't pay for the monthly thing, they'll delete all my stuff and I have to start all over again. Like whereas now, like you can actually be like, yep, this is my stuff and I can compete in this or not, or I can move to another place. Counter-Strike skins, I think, were probably one of the first on the scenes of this. Like, what? There's this $400,000 for the most expensive gun or something like that, 40 maybe.
Yeah.
But yeah. So like it's got to meet with the need. And I think currently it's more about just generating lots of stuff. But now I think there's going to start to be like, okay, this is for this, and you can use it for this, and it's actually kind of cool. And I like it.
Is that ever going to happen where it becomes transferable from game to game or whatever?
Yeah, definitely. For
it
sure.
is.
I mean, it's got to be in the interest of the game development companies to do that. So
right, they have microsystems like within a game developer system where you can trade in between, and there is a consortium right now working on inter-game network trading. So there is intra to the companies within 3 or 4 different games. So it's there. And if you remember back in the days from going to, Sierra Online and how, let's see, ID came out with Doom and how all that grew and different ideas in gaming, it might be another 20 years before this really, like we have to get, it might not, but the people who are on CSGO and on the old systems are happy. We need people to come into the new ones or transition over and for them to be developed.
Where's the incentive?
Big, interesting companies. Now, if Fortnite decides to go interoperable with World of Warcraft, Epic and Blizzard, or I guess Blizzard's now owned by Microsoft. If Epic and Microsoft go interoperable next year, okay, I'm wrong, but I still think that's a 5 to 10, 15 year out where it really becomes the idea of my assets everywhere. It'll be in microcosms for a while.
Think about like our Ethereum argument before. Like, what if instead of World of Warcraft Gold, you could earn and trade in Ethereum? Like, that would just juice the amount of people playing World of Warcraft so much. So I don't know.
I just don't think the companies are going to be that fast to adapt.
All right, Nick, why don't you finish us out here and before we get into price predictions?
Ultimately, I think at the end of the day, we have to look at this as a contract, the smart contract and the token beyond the picture, the image, or even to some degree the utility. But we have to think about the versatility and the power of the contract, right? I think what's going to happen is that this is going to, we've all touched on it in different forms, going to disrupt traditional business models, right? Regulatory bridges from those Web 2 to Web 3 things are going, companies or what metaverses, whatever you want to call it, it's going to take time, but I believe knowing that what we've all talked about with our gaming experience, these digital natives now that we've all taught or are still teaching, they've grown up with these incentives, these like understanding how to gamify things. So I think we have to prepare people for this because the decentralized world is coming and education is usually the last to get disrupted. And so I'm preaching that we all have to kind of embed this as soon as possible so we can learn and tinker with it and disrupt ourselves a little bit, or risk being disrupted, and that's usually what tends to happen. And if we're a lagging indicator, especially in the education field, we don't want to be the last to get on board when we're dealing with like the future.
Yeah, we will be.
Well,
so
let me tell you though, like education's definitely far ahead of most business. Like they're super lagging indicators.
Yeah, I was teaching Bitcoin 4 years ago, and I had World Bank people as parents and stuff, and they would come in to talk about. They're like, "Oh, what is all this?" And this was recently.
Okay, price predictions. It's supposed to be 32 as of a couple weeks ago, right?
It hit 32. Yeah. I put up a 36, but no. But
Yeah,
yeah,
it took a little
my
hit, and
my
then it was
prediction will
back
be
this
shocking.
morning.
So I'm going to let you guys go first.
Yeah, I mean, Bitcoin's up 9% so far in the last 24 hours. That's pretty good. ETH 7%. So it's a bit of a surge. I guess it's supposedly, what are we talking about? Inflation's rearing its head again.
I don't know. I think sell in May and walk away, right? Like, isn't that what they usually say? Isn't that what we could have all done last year or the year before?
Yeah. That's well, I mean, my prediction says a little bit of a dip up and then out. But essentially, I predict by next week we'll be at 24, and everyone will be totally like freaking out.
24.
And
Why?
it goes back.
Because
It needs
next
to
week will be
correct.
May.
Yeah, like there's too many people in the market who have hands that are like all like this, and they need to be moved out to people who have hands like this.
Okay.
You know what
Wow.
I'm saying?
Right. Okay. Well, we'll see next week.
28 next week.
All right. Well, gentlemen, it's been fun. Let's talk again in a week. Hopefully, we'll get the whole crowd again.
Thanks, guys.
Cheers, guys.
Yeah.
All right.
Is this called big announcement coming soon? Yeah.
Yeah.
5, 4, 3.